Hello, and welcome back to a Tock's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Kosaruba, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is a nonprofit organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees today, and a special thanks to Allison Lynch and the entire Zimperium team for helping us make today possible. This afternoon, we're going to hear from our panelists, where we will have a Q&A session, and we are going to pop in a few polls as well as answer your questions. So before we begin, I want to encourage you to please submit those questions of your own down below in the Q&A section of this platform, and also answer any poll questions as they come up to ensure that you receive your CPE credit for today's event. So now that all that's been said, I would like to welcome our panelists. We are going to begin with a round of introductions. So if you could share with us who you are, what agency or organization you represent, and what your role is there. So let's start with Tim, please.
Thank you very much for that, Kirsten. My name is Tim Goodwin. I am the USPTO's Chief Information Security Officer. I have been with the USPTO for about 3.5 years, although I've recently taken on this position as CISO just within the last 45 days. Prior to my involvement with USPTO, I served about just over 19 years with the FBI, dealing with a lot of the issues that we're talking about today. So when I'm speaking from two hats. One, my role within USPTO as a CISO, and then two is my previous experience dealing with a lot of these threats from the FBI cybersecurity side.
Fantastic, thank you. Now over to JT.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. And Tim, thank you again for your service. The stuff that you guys have done is just totally amazes me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. JT Keating, SVP of Strategic Initiatives for Zimperium. As Kirsten mentioned, we're the mobile security company that is sponsoring this particular go-around. I've been doing endpoint security for about 25 years now, and then moved over to Zimperium about 6.5 years ago as I saw the explosion in mobile devices and mobile apps. And so clearly, as we dive into some of these conversations about spyware and the like, mobile devices are a key component of that for multiple reasons. So thank you very much for having me, and definitely looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since you mentioned it, maybe we can start with you first, but I want to ask about some examples of spyware to kick things off and why they are so dangerous.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll give you my thoughts, and obviously really looking forward to hearing Tim's. There's obviously a lot of examples of mobile spyware, and what I was mentioning just a minute ago is these things are perfectly tailored for spyware. They're perfectly tailored because they're always with us. They're literally always with us. They're always on. We take them into meetings. We have them sitting at the dining room table. That we are looking at our emails on them. Got our contacts. I mean, it's like they're tailor-made, right? But there's a lot of well-known software, some of which Tim definitely knows quite well. You got the Pegasus from the NSO group. You've got the stuff from Quadream. So you have some of these ones that are brand name. In terms of people kind of know them. But one of the things we've definitely noticed is, and we're coming out with our new Global Mobile Threat Report, which everybody can get at the end of June, we've noticed some significant changes in some of the code and the providers behind the spyware that are not brand name anymore. They're starting to use open source code and things that are not easily tracked back to people. But yeah, so those are just some of the examples. And, Tim, I don't know, you want to layer on top of that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a never-ending river of adware or malware type devices that are being used within this environment. It's really challenging to kind of keep up with it. So, some of the name brand spyware type stuff that JT kind of mentioned, there's also a large stream of stuff that is not the main brand, mainline stuff. We used to see it a lot with vulnerabilities that were already disclosed, but people aren't actually reading those vulnerabilities or patching those vulnerabilities or using information that could help them protect their devices or their systems. There's also, this aspect to the spyware industry, which there is an actual industry, and similar to what JT is talking about, some of the tradecraft that these companies are using has improved significantly. The sophistication in which they are trying to hide or prevent their customers from being associated to these type of activities has increased significantly. And, another aspect that probably gets overlooked a lot, especially in the commercial world, is that there is a lot of money going into this market. We're talking billions of dollars that is actually being invested to compromise data off of our devices and off of our stuff. I'll go a step further from JT. Not only does it track everything, it's perfect, but think of all the different apps that you're installing. Think about all the different things like my run that I ran this morning. It's in there, my health, my monitor, my physical, people can use this information. The new currency today is really data and applying personal identifiable data that can be targeted back to an individual or an organization to gain some advantage. And there's a lot of different people who have various interests in all this data that's out there. So there are people that have a very strong motivator to be able to get this data, legitimate or illegitimate. And that's, it could come from so many different forms that's really difficult to kind of notch it down. It could happen from, an individual that is just kind of checking to see, what's the latest kind of malware that's out there on the dark web to see if I can get a package of this and just play with it, which is maybe how some people start, to somebody that has no knowledge about any IT at all and just want to outsource to one of these big vendors and say, I want to buy myself an exploitation package that has all these bells and whistles in it. And I don't want to do anything other than just be able to get the information I need from the people I want, which is really kind of alarming, but that's what's actually happening today.
Yeah, thank
you. So I hope that speaks to why it's dangerous aspect of the question.
Thank you, Tim. We're having a little trouble hearing you. There's like some staticness going on, but I mean, we could still hear you. It's just, that's something to fix on your end. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both for kicking us off there with that first question. JT, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, one thing I was going to say, just as Tim was talking about it, and I agree with everything that Tim was mentioning, but one of the other things that we've definitely been starting to see is that a lot of organizations, so ultimately, if you kind of step back and you kind of say, okay, what is spyware, right? What is it capable of doing? As Tim was talking about and I alluded to as well, spyware, when it is functioning, it has the opportunity or the ability to pretty much capture all the information, the currency that Tim was talking about. It can grab your photos, it can take pictures, it can turn on microphones, it can, it can take all your contacts, it can take all the attachments out of your email. I mean, it's literally like it's you, but even with more capabilities quite often, because good spyware can get your keychain, and so it's all this stuff, right? That's when it's actually up there and going. How it gets there has been also changing and evolving. It used to be that it was only the guys that were really good at it that were looking for these zero-day exploits that nobody knew anything about, and that would be kind of what they're doing. Now we've seen a lot of spyware which is more pedestrian in terms of delivery mechanism, but it's taking advantage of, and Tim as a CISO knows this. The single biggest risk in an organization is and has always been a carbon-based life form. Human beings make really stupid decisions, right? I mean, it's what we do, and so in this case, a lot of the attackers are taking advantage of social engineering and simply tricking users into installing things So they don't even have to be super fancy and find these exploits that are like, magic and has pixie dust. But regardless of the delivery mechanism, once it gets on there, it still has the same capabilities. And so the explosion that we've been seeing has been, again, not from the brand name guys. It's been from the folks that are actually trying to remain hidden, that are after a lot of information that's beyond kind of nation state stuff, like what Tim was talking about, health information and stuff like that. So that's been another change we've seen, where it's not just super fancy nation state exploit. It's becoming, unfortunately, mainstream. So there's just another observation.
Yeah, thank you. And that would lead me to ask Tim next, kind of how have you seen spyware threat evolve for government agencies specifically, or even your own?
Yeah, spyware threat, and first of all, it's my mic a little bit better now?
It's still pretty garbled.
Kind of the
I have like 3 different mics here. Let me try this one here.
But now you're coming through clear, so it's like
on. So maybe you just can't move your head.
Yeah,
like, as long as you're like this the whole time.
Okay, I will. Yes, I will. I'm like this talking head impression right here.
There we go.
So yes, the threats have evolved significantly for federal agencies, as you can imagine. I mean, you think about this, like even 20 years ago, you're really looking at, patch systems and things that were, full of holes, and you're really looking at the core IT of how do we defend and monitor and try to get some of these best practices in place. And it really required a partnership with, commercial industry and, suppliers like Microsoft and people who are producing these systems, and Cisco for networking. And it's taken a long time for us to be able to get to where we are today. But that journey has been filled with tons of bumps as sophistication has increased with the types of activities that we're seeing over the years. It's a direct result of the availability of technology and the ease of use of technology. It used to be you really did have to know somebody that was really skilled in this area to be able to compromise systems to get the effects that you wanted. Nowadays, there's so many different ways that we can communicate with each other, and it's easier for people to initiate either scams or to impersonate individuals, being senior executives or somebody that may be within your own contact list, spoof numbers. And so you can get information very easily from people that traditionally, you may not have had the same methods for. Case in point, with a lot of phishing emails, I think that people have seen, the poorly written, some of the training that we have for cybersecurity perspective is check the URL, make sure that, it's somebody from your contact list or somebody that I think those things are kind of going to go out the window pretty soon. You think about the bad side of like ChatGPT. Well, if you have a hard time crafting an email message that looks authentic because you're maybe not a first language English speaker, well, there's a tool for that can produce a well-written and very compelling message for you. And you can shorten the URLs and can do some changing on URLs that make things a little bit more easier. So it makes targeting people a lot easier. Other aspects of it for the government that's changed over the years is supply chain risk. When we take a look a couple of years ago at solar winds and the impact it had across all of the U.S. federal government, it was significant. It's an area that's really difficult to get your hands on because you put so much trust into the vendor and the sub-vendors and the partners that they have to produce these products, that there's a whole area with supply chain risks that the government is getting into that traditionally they hadn't for most of the federal agencies. They're looking at procurement law, they're looking at, rules within the FAR about how to procure some of these things, but now they're actually including cybersecurity, including an awareness about what should go into contracts, what should be included with your procurements. And that's an escalation that just wasn't there even a few years ago. So it's requiring agencies to become a lot more cyber smart. And not aware. I think that was maybe what we were 10 years ago. Be cyber aware. I think we've heard that a lot, but we need to do more than that. It's getting to the point that everybody needs to be proactive, in increasing cyber literacy across agencies is a key factor. So we can see and identify and help the general audience, they're recognize these things to be able to make us stronger. Those are significant efforts, and they're not easy ones either, because it's really a cultural change to across the federal agency. And so you see some of that with, the executive memos that's been released from the White House and the National Strategy on Cyber. It has really changed the way that the U.S. federal government looks at cybersecurity, and a lot of it is with these ransomware attacks or the spyware, loss of, for us here at USPTO, the loss of intellectual property is extremely important to us. So protecting and safeguarding that. There's obviously a lot of people who would be interested in our intellectual property before it's actually published. So, we have to remain cognizant of the threats and try to teach our people and our staff what they should be looking out for. So a significant investment.
Thank you, Tim. And yes, we can hear you much better now. We can spend a little bit more time here on this question. If JT, you have anything else you'd like to add based on what Tim just shared?
No, the one thing I would say in terms of evolution a little bit, one, I want to go off something that Tim said and then just add one other point, because, Tim was making a great point, kind of looking at it from that focus. The ChatGPT thing, the whole generative AI is becoming such a hot topic in and around security for multiple reasons. And we spend, our Z Labs research arm spends a lot of time kind of looking at this stuff. And Tim nailed it, that one of the low-hanging fruit for the bad guys is using ChatGPT, and we've seen it multiple times for phishing texts. And by the way, part of our research we're coming out with, the average user is 6 to 10 times more likely to click on a phishing link in an SMS than they are in email. And oh, by the way, traditional corporate anti-phishing solutions are inline in corporate email. They're not protecting SMS, Messenger, so the delivery part. And so to Tim's point, the ChatGPT part is, making that more effective. That is one of the ways the bad guys are already using generative AI. So that's on the one thing. The one other thing I will say from an evolution of spyware standpoint is we noticed last year a significant spike in believe it or not, the delivery mechanism quite often, in terms of, everybody talks about the dark web and, et cetera. Some of this stuff is on like GitHub. Some of this stuff is like in public repositories. You can literally even get some of this stuff today. And everyone's doing their best to try and weed it out, but that's not what those repositories were built for. It's not like the Apple App Store where they said, look, we're gonna lock everything down, and so it's even the delivery mechanism of how you can procure it has changed, and will continue to evolve as well.
I almost clicked on one of those phishing texts the other day, and I sit through these conversations all the time, and it was so convincing. It almost got me for like 2 seconds.
You guys, you'll have to excuse me. My Netflix account is being suspended again, so I'll be back.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I get a message from Karen asking if she could borrow a dress through text, and then the next message is, here, click this link.
Yeah.
But it shows the sophistication that it comes very easy. It's cheap, it's easy. You can implement this stuff yourself, or training people. The other aspect of it also is the automation and the ability to spin up easily, virtual servers, machines that can launch some of these attacks, which are very cheap for somebody to do. And they can pivot around to different areas in or outside different cloud departments. And so there's a lot of responsibility of telecom providers. They've always been doing this, but the evolution of this is really quite fascinating. I would be welcomed if you guys done any analysis, like over the last 15 years, the trajectory that this has taken. It's mind-blowing, quite honestly. In the last probably 2 years, especially with the generative tools, it's just taken a different part. And I don't want to say that in a negative way. I mean, there's always, unintentional use of some technologies that gets put out there. Obviously, generative tools could be a huge benefit for all of us, but just as it's most of our technologies we have, somebody's going to find something that can compromise other people or they use it for their own purposes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, let's take a quick pause here and throw up our first poll question, please. And that will be, what is the current state of your organization's cybersecurity infrastructure for protecting mobile data? So folks at home, please take a minute to respond to that. Tim, let's start with you on this next question here. I want to talk about how does BYOD, BYOAD, or GFE mobile devices affect security implementation?
So that's actually a conversation we've been having a lot here at USPTO, as the evolution and trying to figure out, quite honestly, how do we evolve the technologies that are out there? I would say, the BYOD has been it's been around for obviously a while. Implementation of that has been sort of a mixed bag. When I talk to other agencies and I see what they have done at USPTO, we do have a program in place that allows that. Part of my chief concern as a system is to understand how are we protecting that information, that data that's on those devices when you don't have physical controls. So you can't do a mobile device management on top of a personal device or P2. You're basically asking our end users to have an agent on their personal phone, and we can wipe the phone if we see something different. It gets into policy and legal issues, which are very complicated and they're hard to resolve. But at the same time, you're also going to need people to have access to the information that they need. So you run up against kind of the old school model of buying a whole bunch of GFE, give it to every single user, put an infrastructure in place that's going to manage that and to monitor it on itself. I think the way that we are moving as an organization, I think that it's definitely up for debate across federal agencies how we implement it. But having core service providers like Microsoft Office 365, where you have centralized management and controls at a granular level, helps us mitigate some of those risks and the other security products that are included in there. One of the things that we're looking at trying to do is figure out how do we minimize the risk of managing GFE with the security concerns that we have going to a centralized cloud provider like Office 365. The question is still out. So we are exploring, we've been investing, we've been looking at some of these things, but there's a lot of challenging aspects to it for sure. And I'd equally like to hear what JT thinks.
Oh, please go ahead, JT.
Yeah, no, Tim was hitting on a lot of key points. So what we've seen is, and again, we've been, this is not a company or a product, presentation or discussion. That's not the point of this. But given the fact that we've worked with thousands of companies and thousands of government organizations, including DoD and JP Morgan Chase, like a lot of these different folks, we've had experience across the board, right? And we've seen it. And one of the things I get to do, which I really enjoy doing, is I moderate our customer panel in each one of our customer advisory board meetings, right? And this whole topic of BYOD, managed versus unmanaged, continues to come up. And literally every one of our organizations that we deal with, they're all kind of now coming to, even you would think they wouldn't be, but the intelligence communities and defense communities, they're coming to grips with the fact that people want to use their own device. They don't want to carry two devices. So the whole BYOD or unmanaged side of things has continued to come up. And I thought the poll question for credits was a really good one and an interesting one. Because even though I can't see it anymore, I just took a glance at it. That second category. There's mobile device management. Okay, we're going to manage the device, and MDMs, were built really designed to do two things. If JT gets fired again because he says something stupid in a Tock webinar, how do we get our corporate data off the device, right? Then there's, what happens if Tim loses his phone again? How do we get the corporate data off the device? But there was these nasty, scary messages. The corporation or the agency can see your phones, can wipe your contacts, and so people are like, no. You're not going to do that on my device, right? When it's my own device. So a lot of people have moved to mobile application management, and as Tim pointed out, with the key being the O365. That was really the driver, because the first thing anyone does on these devices is give people access to their email. That's like the first thing. So when we actually worked with Microsoft on their mobile application management SDK, where instead of managing the device, you come into Outlook, and if our tech says this device has been compromised, if there's malware, if it's on a fake Wi-Fi network, you don't get access to Outlook until you solve the problem. So it's not managing the device, it's basically managing access to the apps themselves. So that whole trend towards BYOD, I don't think it's going to stop. I think it's going to continue. And if you think about that scenario I just got finished talking about, we're going to assess the risk that device has. I already know that it's Kirsten. On the fly, I'm going to decide if you get access to Outlook. That's zero trust. And so I think the combination of identity and the risk posture of the device and giving access on the fly based on those two conditions, which is zero trust, that whole thing is just going to continue escalating on the mobile side, with less and less management of the device and more threat awareness and decisions on the fly. But Tim, I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I can't speak for obviously like all federal agencies out there. I know that we at USPTO, that's exactly the path that we're looking at. It is hard to keep up with the communications and make sure that we do it in a secure fashion. Being part of a federal agency, we're obviously subject to NARA, the rules for records of retention. So there is orders out there that we must comply with for just text messages. So that's like one of the challenges that we have, is how do you retain those records on like BYOD devices that they're not things you can necessarily pull up easily, especially on iPhones, where those messages are very difficult to pull off if you need to. So we're wrestling with some regulatory and compliance type issues, but trying to solve the basic communication, how people work and function. At the same time, we're also recognizing that we need to do more of that application side access and control, and move towards SASE. I think that's an important aspect, so we can have a more secure, reliable connection to the applications and the data that we need without necessarily having to manage the devices. I mean, a couple of years ago, I guess, when the cloud came up and people were like, wow, I can move all my physical infrastructure to the cloud and it's going to solve all my problems. There's a lot of excitement about that. I think that what the BYOD and some of the discussions when the BYOD first came out was a lot of trepidation, but then that kind of excitement to say that this is something that we can do with a trusted partner who has the rules and policies and protection in place. So it becomes a shift. It really does shift from that old traditional model of managing the device, managing rules of blacklisting or whitelisting for what connections can be made out from the device, what apps can be installed, how you can download data or content. All those things can be achieved through this application management approach. And so we're at USPTO, we're definitely looking at adopting that practice fully.
Tim, going off something you were saying real quick, and poor Kirsten, she has to deal with, people like you and I, because we actually think this is fun. So we just keep talking. And, she's like, well, I've got my checklist I've got to go through, so it's like, yeah, okay, but hey, we're having fun here. Okay. We're just going to keep talking.
Keep going. I love it.
Tim, one of the things you were saying just kind of triggered a thought, and it's all kind of bringing this kind of back together, even from beforehand. By the way, first thing on that poll, that shows the type of people that we have on these calls with ATARC, because that 36% for mobile application management, almost the same as MDM, shows that the people here are actually kind of further along the curve than some of the other folks, right? Because if you were to put that poll up with a general group of security practitioners across commercial and public sector, that MAM number would not have been that high. And so, that's what it's worth. That's a testimony. But then the other part is that, as Tim was talking about, when you're dealing with a BYOD, when you're dealing with a personal device, when we started the whole conversation, and obviously, there's spyware and there's unvetted apps, a couple of the topics, we're here to talk about. On the spyware side, one of the benefits to the end user of an organization that puts out a threat detect, what Gartner calls mobile threat defense, but an ability to detect things like spyware as a part of their, kind of conditional access, zero trust kind of approach. There's actual benefits to the consumer. It's the management part, that's all for the company. That's all for the agency, right? The threat detection part, that's for us both. Because if spyware, for instance, got on my machine, it's not just this Imperium information that's at risk. It's my information that's at risk. It's my family's information that's at risk. It's my medical, as Tim was talking about, information that's at risk. So I do think this is one of those interesting things where in enabling a BYOD, agencies and organizations can actually talk about the benefits of protection, not only for the agency, but also for the employee, because you get both. If there's spyware on my device, I kind of want to know. And to be honest, I'm probably personally less concerned about Imperium than I am about my kids. So just for what it's worth.
Yeah. And I want to ask next, Tim, maybe we'll start with you and then JT add on, but what about those unintentionally risky threats, such as apps, for example? What do you think organizations should do, if anything, about those as it relates to what we just discussed?
Yeah, that's a really challenging prospect, especially with the discussion we're just having with BYOD. Mm-hmm. And so we get into some of the rub here with the MDM versus MAM. Well, on MDM, you can prevent a lot of those like unintentional apps that may be on your device. You can control which apps are allowed to be installed, which marketplace is allowed to be controlled from, how the apps are being used. You have some level of monitoring and some level of confidence in there. With the BYOD, and especially pertaining to this question, you don't. That's the whole point of it, that you put a lot of trust into the user. And as JT said, I agree. If you have to put your trust and your security practices into an end user, the game's over. It's way too late at that point. So it's obviously a big challenge there, because it goes to user training, and I say user training, but you're really talking about public education at this point, because the wide availability of all the various apps that are the plethora, the sea of apps that are available, and what's hot today, by the time that it may get to a level that people are concerned about it, maybe a year from now, and people have already been using that app or that device in the facility, and people don't think about it as much. We're trying to raise awareness, but how many apps have access to your phone, to your recorder on your phone? And part of the features of that, there's a lot of apps that are actually poorly coded and just don't work as well. They're buggy. there's also a lot of apps that out of the box want access to all these areas of your phone that don't need to. So, you have a game that you download, and that might be a way for some of these spyware activities to occur. So, let's just say tic-tac-toe, because I don't have a good game repository here, but I download a tic-tac-toe to my phone. But for some reason, it wants access to my contacts, to my photos, to my camera, to my microphone. And how many people read through the terms and conditions or don't, and they just click yes and say, okay, fine, enable all. That's been a challenge for many years. Luckily, a lot of the providers have started to implement rules where it's set on by default, it's off by default. You have to opt in and hit the user has to explicitly state, but it's still pretty easy to get around. Mm-hmm. So the long story short here is, there's a lot of challenges with that. I'm not sure that we have a great solution to how to deal with some of these unintended consequences, other than trying to educate people. And again, that's not great either, because you never know the effectiveness of that or how well it takes. And in my opinion, it's just it kind of gives you maybe a lukewarm fuzzy about how well you're doing, but it doesn't actually protect your data. It doesn't actually prevent capturing of information or details about your organization, internal stuff. It's really kind of troubling to think about. And so, I'll let JT chime in here on that.
No, Tim, I agree with pretty much everything you were saying. So I kind of look at it, and I kind of, just because my brain is simplistic, I kind of take it down in steps, right? So step one, based on our research, the average user, whether it's BYOD or corporate, which I think is interesting, or managed versus unmanaged, because sometimes we use these terms synonymously and we probably shouldn't, right? Because there might be an organization that enables BYOD only if it's a managed device, and but as a general rule, but on average, 10% of the apps that are on a device accessing, let's say, agency data, are productivity-related apps, O365 or whatever the case may be. 90% are not. So they are what the person wants. It could be Snapchat, it could be TikTok, Facebook, it could be, whatever, right? Those kind of third-party apps have some of the risks that Tim was talking about. A lot of them are accessing, or requesting elevated privileges and additional permissions and things on those lines. A lot of them are, establishing VPNs that are outside of your organization. Some of them are sending traffic to a foreign country. And so how do you identify those apps? And then how do you set policies at scale? Because if you think about it, it's like, okay, so maybe average person has 80 apps, maybe 8 of those are sanctioned apps, and the other 72 are, question marks. Well, that's mine. Tim's different. Kirsten's different. So how do you deal with it at scale, right? There's the ones where you basically say, hey, look, I want to, as we know, there's been some out in recently, we want to ban this social media app on all federal agency devices because we believe the traffic's going to a foreign country. In that case, you're naming an app, that has been a specific app that you want to go after. Oh, by the way, there's multiple versions of that app, but you're saying so first you need to identify where that app is. Then you need to be able to have some kind of policy enforcement mechanism to ensure compliance. Then, as Tim talked about, you have to basically understand, okay, if it's a personally owned device, how do I handle this differently, or do I handle it differently? And it can be where you say, hey, look, we don't care. If you have that on your device, you can't have access to our agency resources. So if you either get that off your device or you don't have access, but then somebody's like, all right, well, I guess I won't work then, so and as I mean, Tim definitely knows because he's at the front line. You've got that teeter-tot of, highly secured, but then the users are, feel like they can't be productive, versus users feel like they can be productive, but you're like, okay, it's Wild West. I have no idea what risks I'm exposing my organization to, so it's that constant kind of trade-off, but that's at the app level. The real part, in my opinion, is not really the app level. The real part is what conditions am I not going to accept as an organization? That particular one that we've all know about, they were saying, we believe traffic is going to China. So to me, the real thing should be, what apps are sending traffic to that country, if that is a country that matters, right? It's not just, we happen to know that one's owned by it. Are there other ones that are sending traffic to the same place? So it becomes a little bit complicated, but what it really comes down to, though, is how do I know which one of these apps have that capability? And that requires two things: creating an inventory of the apps, which, by the way, on Android, you can do without an MDM. On iOS, you need an MDM in order to get app inventories. Then it's assessing those apps against whatever you consider to be policy violations. But it's a two-step process. I need the inventory, then I need to be able to assess, then I figure out what I'm actually going to do with it. But, so I don't know, Tim, do you, any part of that you agree with or disagree with?
I think 50-50. Most of it, I'll give like 95% I agree with.
Hey, that's better than
5%.
Right.
Yeah, the other 5%, it's not really a disagreement, but it's more of, that's not a disagreement. It's talking about the challenges with that, though.
Right.
Especially so if you're going through and basically identifying, creating an inventory of your apps, sure. What we have seen was problematic, and it's always problematic, is how do you create that secondary list of apps that you whitelist or blacklist? Maybe you do a whitelist approach in order to prevent yourself from having to go through and look at all the different apps that people want. Or you have a request system set up where somebody says, hey, I want this app, which always inevitably happens. And it takes resources and people to actually go and investigate that app. And so there's a resource constraint there to try to figure out. And if the end users are not sure or confused, it takes a lot of effort and resources, like on our side, in order to actually do that work. Right. And nobody has the depth to go into, these apps. So one of the other aspects of it is, just the description of the app. What does the app say it does? That's all just text. What we've seen in a lot of different instances of the description of what the app does, especially when some of these apps are claimed to be secure communication devices. They'll wipe their messages within a time period. That may be true or may appear true on the surface, but a lot of it's not true. And some of those apps are definitely sending information to other locations. So, it becomes really challenging to balance, as you said, JT, all these different aspects of it to make sure that we have capabilities that the end users find productive for the business side. On the personal side, that's even more challenging because now you're kind of stepping on toes of what somebody's individual rights or preferences are for what they want, which definitely goes up against the norms within the federal sector of what's allowed. And so we don't, from my perspective, I really don't want to see a lot of the information that's there because it can pass certain liabilities to us, which again brings us back around to the age-old argument of MDM issuing GFE or BYOD. Right. The thing that I do like about those conversations, though, is that at least on the MAN side of the house, and we're talking about like over 365, that's really the only thing that's really enabled it, is that those technologies have secured as advanced so much, and the security practices that goes along with those have advanced so much. It gives us strong confidence in the capabilities that's there to allow us to consider these types of programs. Outside of that, the political, resource issues,
Right.
like that's where it starts to get harder. But this is a good conversation. I like this.
No, I agree with you 100%. And by the way, on the as I mentioned earlier, this is not a product conversation, but because this issue has come up enough and enough and enough, companies like ours have actually created technology to help solve a lot of what you were just talking about. So, we do mobile threat defense, we do active detection of device network phishing, malicious attacks, right? But because of this 90% problem, because of these apps that are on there where you're like, well, what are we going to do with them, right? And you can get the inventory from the MDM, for instance. But to your point, you look at the descriptions and there's like nothing there, right? So I want to say 6 years ago, we bought a company and we've got a particular technology that we call Z3A because everything's Z for us, which fortunately, hopefully the marketing people can figure out how to kill at some point because it just bugs me. And I say that as the guy who used to run marketing, side note, but it's advanced app analysis, Z3A. And so we actually, for every single app that's inventoried, we pull all this data out. We know what is it doing with encryption? Where is it sending information? What cloud services is it using? We run it against OWASP, we run it against Mavis, and so the people in the organization can look at these reports, and some of the technical reports 80 pages long. The executive report is shorter, but again, not about product, but there are solutions out there because this is such a problem, especially at scale, where you're so we have a lot of customers who actually have said, I'm not sure I'm really totally into buying into your mobile threat defense yet, right? Because Apple told me everything is safe, and so I'm totally fine, so it's like, okay, you got that part. But there's a lot of people say, we just want the app analysis. We want to know what our apps are doing, and we can't handle it at scale like you were talking about. So it's, to me, one of the things I love, and the only kind of the primary reason I mention it is when the vendors and the customers are talking to each other, and you're looking at what problems are you really trying to solve, then we're good at making stuff. You guys are good at telling us what you need. When you actually start putting those things together, it's pretty cool. So on this side of things, we got the spyware malicious side, then you've got the more privacy and risk, security risk side on the unvetted apps. How do you put these together? And part of it now, actually, Tim, is that the whole SBOM thing, where the whole, we saw it with SolarWinds. Okay, well, what about mobile? Because if you think about mobile apps, they're Legos. They're Legos. The average app has somewhere around 15 to 20 third-party SDKs. So when developers go to create something, they're like, oh, I need access to a camera. Well, I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to, or ChatGTP, and I'm going to find an SDK, software development kit, and I'm going to click that in. But I'm trying to create code like this. I'm not going to spend any time looking at what is the history of that SDK. What is it doing? Is it accessing more things than it should? So when you actually build these apps, a lot of times there's completely inadvertent holes that these guys are opening up because they're just clicking Legos together. So that whole side of things has been fascinating to me to see. You got unmanaged devices, and you really have unmanaged apps if you kind of think about it in the same construct.
I'm going to interrupt real quick so that we can put up our second poll question. This one is around how your organization, folks at home, are enforcing the app ban. So please take a minute to respond to that. And real quick, before we begin to wrap up the discussion too, I want to open it up to both of you around a best practice that maybe hasn't been brought up yet to address these risks and threats. So if there's a best practice or two that you could share with us, I think that might be a good way to kind of come to the end of our discussion here.
Sounds good. Tim, would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
Why don't you go ahead and leave this off? Looks like you're on a roll.
All right, here we go. No, I would say that the primary one that I would say is the best practice, and again, keeping all product and tech and everything else out of it. I would say that the best, interesting on the poll question, we can come back to that in a minute. Sorry, just showed up right in the middle of Tim's face. The best thing I would suggest is this. Today, there is significantly more malware on Android than there is on iOS, okay? People will say, well, it's because Apple does an incredible job of vetting all the apps that come in the App Store. And the reality is they do. They do a great job, but so does Google. Matter of fact, we vet every single app that goes into Google before it's put into Google, and we tell them a rating, okay? So that's not the issue. 90+% of all the malware we see on Android comes from third-party app stores. In Android, the ethos is you can go anywhere. You can get apps from anywhere. That's the way it is. 90+% of the malware, including spyware, comes from third-party app stores. So I would tell people, do not go to third-party app stores. If you're on iOS, don't jailbreak your phone and go to third-party app stores. Take it from the legitimate source, and you will significantly lower your risk posture. Now, one of the things we have been keeping a close eye on for a number of years is Apple is right now in the middle of going through a thing both in Europe and the United States from an antitrust standpoint that my personal opinion, this is not his Imperium opinion, this is my opinion. It's a matter of when, not if, Apple has to allow third-party app stores to occur. That will be where all the malware comes from on iOS as well. And today, even on iOS, third-party app stores is where malicious profiles, malicious shortcuts, the guys are getting around it because there's no vetting. So my number one thing would be, don't go to third-party app stores as a primary recommendation. So Tim, I don't know, what's yours?
No, that's definitely a really good one, especially your point on, Android and, the differences between the App Store on Android and iOS. I take it for granted sometimes because I think that's just common knowledge, but you're right, it's not. People look for capabilities, and it's actually hard sometimes for people to know which App Store on Android or even on other marketplaces they're actually going to, because they just get links, they click the link, I want this game or this tool or something, and not even realizing what they're downloading, because there's also this sophistication within the market that apps are intended to look like popular apps. So less or lower quality apps are intended intentionally to look like more popular apps to hopefully get that click and get downloaded. And so that's another aspect of what we're talking to lead this conversation on about how advancements in spyware have evolved. And some of it doesn't need to be like all those techniques that we've done historically and seen historically. And data is the name of the game. There's lots of different ways you can get data off of a device nowadays. It's a hard question to say, what's the best practices and lessons learned for the social aspect, the social part of it, where you're trying to understand, which apps should we, pick, which ones we don't. Regardless of that, updating and making sure you have the latest patch version is extremely important. Whether it's on any device, Apple has recently introduced, the rapid security patch, which is, I think, going to be a game changer yet again in the industry to help, with specific targeted attacks that they can actually get patches specific to that vulnerability out in 24 hours or less. It'd be great if there's other organizations that are going to be adopting some of those types of approaches, but you're still going to have those vulnerabilities on Android devices. You're still going to have to run your personal computers, your personal laptops, because those are also connected to, a lot of these environments. So, the challenges are pretty steep. And I know it's the age-old patch. Make sure you have to the latest version, but that is one of the best defenses because it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. All of us are trying to keep our devices secure, and we're reliant upon industry to provide those patches and to kind of look out for us. Well, it takes time to develop those patches, or even time to identify the vulnerabilities that exist for that vendor, and there's a process that it goes through. So people that have malicious intent try to compromise or use that vulnerability that's out there. They take advantage that it has been patched yet. We've seen many times that there's devices that haven't done anything. They haven't upgraded to the latest operating system in like 6 years. And guess what? Those are just having a field day. People don't have to work hard on old devices. I mean, there is a plethora of ways to get onto the devices that are out there. And there's a lot of reasons that people say they don't want to upgrade because they have an application that's not compatible with get a new application. Update your devices, update your system, get a new application.
My mom she doesn't want to slow down Angry Birds. That's her rationale for not patching. I'm like, okay, Mom, that's great. Once again, gets back to the users, the admin, striking fear, so yeah.
All right, well, thank you. I'm going to call for poll question number 3 up on the screen, and then we'll end with some key takeaways. So folks at home, last poll, what are your enterprise's top 3 security concerns related to mobile endpoints? So just take a minute to respond to that. And then for our 2 panelists, we are coming to the end of time here, but I want to give you each a minute or 2 to kind of share with our audience your parting words of wisdom or a key takeaway from this conversation that you found really insightful. Let's start with Tim, and then we'll end with JT.
So I appreciate, thank you, Kirsten and Tock for having me out here to speak at this event. I would pass on, my words of wisdom is to have this type of conversation within your own organization. If you're not talking about this, if you're not discussing it with your peers, with your leadership, you're way behind the 8 ball. You need to be having these types of conversations. You need to be able to speak frankly about it and with facts and data that support it. Not conjecture or, the boogeyman from the malware side of the house is going to come get us. There are real threats that happen every single day. And just like a shout out, on our USPTO site, we publish and just remind everybody that we will never ask for your credit card information over the phone. There's reasons why we post messages like that, because people try to take advantage of, of what we have. So they are very much real. And I believe if anybody's participating in this discussion, I think you all know that the threat is real and there's a lot of discussions that need to be made. So have the conversations, be frank about what you're talking about. So that's my recommendation.
Thank you, Tim. And JT.
Yeah, no, Tim, that's a great recommendation. You're spot on. I mean, it's kind of like when I was saying, I think simplistically about things, and it's like you kind of have to break it down step at a time. It's like you can't see a threat if you don't have an ability to see a threat. It's like, so it's kind of step 1, right? You need visibility. Then you can figure out what you're going to do once you get the data. But to your point, having these conversations and saying, okay, based on our mobile footprint, our mobile approach and strategy, we talk a lot as Imperium about the fact that that mobile has become a central point for a lot of organizations in a lot of different ways. And there's these mobile powered business initiatives, whether it's protecting your employees or protecting your consumers with the apps you produce. Most of this conversation has been on protecting your employees, but you've got these initiatives, and mobile's different. Mobile is different. Mobile is different in terms of the personal versus corporate. It's different in terms of the architecture of the devices themselves. It's different in terms of what you can and cannot do from a security standpoint. So I think having the conversations like what Tim was talking about and recognizing even what you're talking about, we don't worry that much about personal apps on desktops and laptops that we own and we control. And all of a sudden now it's out here. I mean, it's like a totally different world. And in mobile, when somebody produces an app, usually in the rest of the world, we run the apps on our servers or on our desktops. First thing you do is you hand it to the bad guys, so it's having the conversation and accounting for the reality of the differences of mobile versus traditional as you're creating that strategy. I think is critical, because you can't just port the traditional thinking over. There are some time-tested security laws that still are there, persistence and all that stuff. But it's different, and so you need to account for the differences as you're creating the strategy. So, and once again, I love how ATARC brings topics like this out to people, because this is stuff that people kind of like, hey, we're trying to figure it out, because it is relatively new. So thank you again for having us. And Tim, it's been a lot of fun, chatting with you about this stuff, and wish we could do it longer, but I don't think Kirsten's going to let us.
We'll have to have you both back again soon. Yes, thank you both so much. Thank you to the folks at home watching and listening, and of course our partners at Syncurium for helping us make today possible. So if anyone wants to go ahead and register for our next webinar, it's on insider risk, education, awareness, and training. And also don't forget to answer the last poll about how you'd like to receive your CPU credit. So with that, everyone have a great rest of your day, week. We'll see you next Thursday. Bye.
Thank you all so much. It was fun. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you.